let's talk about the first big question. How do you structure what you're doing? So there's a lot of options. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a tax attorney. All of this is from my nonprofit master's program and my experience. So that's my caveat. But these are some of the structures that you might consider for your library of things. Many of them start as an informal group. These are neighbors, people who live in a specific city, people who know each other often. And often the first step they take is to become a fiscally sponsored project. We'll talk about that all in a minute. If you want to formalize, the step you take, regardless of structure, is incorporation. You incorporate as a business. And the kind of business you choose really affects a lot of the future of your organization. The vast majority of libraries of things in the US are 501c3 nonprofits. Every country has different structures, but in the US, these are the structures that we have available to us. Some, especially internationally, in countries that don't have this kind of structure or don't have the culture of nonprofit or like charity-based governance, will choose to be a traditional corporation, what we call a for-profit often. In the US, we have some hybrid options, S corporations and B corporations. You think of something like Patagonia or Kind Bars. These are companies that have taken advantage of this new tax structure. We'll talk about that a little bit, but it's a little bit complex. So if you're considering being an S or B corporation, I would look at one of the resources that we'll talk about at the end for some legal help. So these are some pros and cons of all of them. None of these is the right way. Your group, your community, your users will dictate what's best for you. So informal groups are flexible and easy. Very good way to get started. You can stay a formal group until you need to not be one. That's okay. But you need to consider that all of the income and expenses for the organization have to be tied to an individual. So in the US, some entity needs to be responsible for any transaction, whether that's money in or money out. And without a corporate entity, a person has to be responsible. That means you get taxed on any donations, income, anything like that as an individual. So if you have any other sort of crowdfunding platform and you don't have a corporate tax ID, some individual is going to get that listed as income on their taxes, just so you know. You also don't have a business entity to purchase a domain or insurance or sign leases or anything like that. One person gets stuck with it. And you don't have a structure for succession planning or handing it off. So that one person has a really hard time getting out when they need to. And that can lead to it being very messy. Fiscal sponsorship is a really great first step. Shareable was fiscally sponsored. We were fiscally sponsored for a decade before we became an independent 501c3. And this is essentially, you become a project of a nonprofit. So you operate under their 501c3 designation, which is your tax exempt designation from the IRS. Often they provide additional business services. Legally, all of your employees are employees of that nonprofit. And so they do payroll, HR, sometimes they will do training or offer you a mailbox, other kinds of things like that. But really what that means is that they are legally responsible for your money. So all of the money goes through them, which it has its pluses and minuses. Typically they charge between 5 and 10% of income. I have seen fiscal sponsors propose fees of up to 20%. Be very wary of that. 5 to 10, maybe 15 is an industry standard. So be wary of any nonprofit that's going to charge you a larger percentage of your income. Some of them charge a flat fee also, which is great. Technically, your organization is also governed by your sponsor's board. So you're all employees of that nonprofit. This is just a program basically of theirs legally. And so you have some amount of less autonomy and transparency than you would if you were an independent nonprofit. You don't have to file your own taxes, but also nobody can see your Form 990. If you're ready to move on from either of those options, your first step for anything else is to incorporate. This is state by state. So your first step is to determine your state's requirements for incorporating a business. They're all pretty standard. You have to choose your resident agent. This is the filling out the paperwork part. You need to create bylaws and gather any other documentation that's required by your state. And they all charge some fee for the most part. Most states do, not all do. It's generally not a huge amount of money. It's typically under $100. You will, when you incorporate, need to decide whether you're going to pursue a nonprofit status or not in most states. You'll have to create a business structure for yourself either way, and then you go on to get your nonprofit certification from the IRS, hopefully. Most of these incorporate as an LLC. Sole proprietorships and other business structures get complicated when you go to turn them into a nonprofit. So LLC is typically what people choose, and you'll want to file as a non-stock corporation. So that just means nonprofit, and then you will get the tax exemption later. Your resident agent is just somebody in the state who will sign the application and gets the mail. That's all it is. You can always change it. but it's not huge. It's cool for somebody to get to be the first resident agent of a business. Yeah, and then you file. And typically this step is pretty quick turnaround, a month or two, to get certificate of incorporation. Okay, once you've incorporated, it's a good idea right away, even before you've gotten, or as soon as you've gotten your tax ID from the state, to go ahead and file your 501c3 application. If you know that's what you want to do, because it takes a long time. At a certain point in 2020, and actually in the years previous, the IRS was so back up to a year to 18 months. Now it's back down to 4 to 6 months for the most part, but it can really get held up. So just know that this takes a while. It's a process. It's also not the easiest form to fill out, but I've did our version of this. It's called the 1023 form that you file with the IRS, as well as our bylaws. Every other document I'm going to talk about today, I've sent Shareable a folder that they're going to share with you that has our examples. The pluses and minuses of being a nonprofit. This is what the vast majority of us choose. The biggest one is that you can get grants and tax deductible donations. Almost all grants have to be made to a 501c3 designated business. That's because of the structure of private foundations, which we'll get to in a second. There's also a culture of seeing nonprofits as trustworthy. People like to support a nonprofit. You get industry discounts and resources I'll talk about at the end. And then you're also exempt from paying sales income and property tax. Not only do people get a tax deduction for giving you money, theoretically, you also don't pay any taxes as a business, which is huge. And I just want to dispel this myth. Nonprofits can carry a profit. They can carry a surplus from year to year. It's just that individual people, shareholders, can't profit from the business. So when we say nonprofit, you can make money. You can have a surplus. You can have cash in the bank. It just means that that surplus doesn't then get divided among shareholders. That's it. There are downsides. Besides the whole nonprofit industrial complex, which is its own topic, we could get into at any point. There are hiccups to being a nonprofit, things you need to be on the lookout for. It's rigorous. You have to do this corporate filing first. You have to submit this IRS application. You have to do an annual 990 federal tax filing. This is just like submitting your personal taxes, but for the business. And the IRS really cares because they have given you this specific exemption. And so they look pretty carefully at your filings. If you have no income or very little income, it takes about 10 minutes. It's very simple to do what's called 990 postcard or 990 easy, very easy. So if, for example, you are fiscally sponsored and you're not technically getting any money because it's going to your sponsor, you can become a nonprofit at any point and your tax filing is super easy because you don't have any money. So there's no need to wait on that if you don't want to. If you are an independent nonprofit, you have to file that 990 every year. And you also have to register in almost every state to do fundraising and to get a sales tax exemption. So there's additional registrations you need to do to get the benefits. And then once you grow, once you get to having 600,000 in charitable contributions or more, you have to do a financial audit with a certified auditor. It's very expensive and very lengthy. So just know that threshold is there. When you go to fill out your 1023 form, there will be a couple different options. So the other tax exempt structure in the US is also a 501c3, but it's a private foundation. That is not what you want. That is for grant making. This comes up every now and then in the Tool Library Google group. I'm registering. Which one do I pick? Do not pick private foundation. That is not for you. It's complicated. There are also other 501c designations you could consider. Most of them are not the right fit, but you can look into it. The 501c6 membership organization is one that I've seen a few tool libraries use. It's not tax exempt, and donations are not tax deductible. But you also don't have to do all that business with the filing and the fundraising, all that stuff. So if you had, for example, just a neighborhood association that was going to start a tool library, your neighborhood association, if it's incorporated, is probably a 501c6. If you had an HOA, for example, some of those are 501c6s. So there are other structures you could consider. One of the things we'll talk about at the end is you probably have a community law clinic near you, and they are a great place to go to. I am not a lawyer, again, but just know that there are other options out there if you want to explore them beyond the 501c3 designation. I think there are 8 in the US. And then traditional and social benefit corporations are an option. You can be a for-profit tool library or library of things. That is an option. It's somewhat counterproductive, I think. In some ways, it's a little bit counterintuitive to what we do in terms of sharing and decapitalizing, but it is an option. You would then have to pay sales and property tax. You would still have to file business income taxes, and you can't get grants or do fundraising. There's not a huge amount of benefit for what we're doing.